Alright, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to another video. This one we'll be talking about positioning using CSS and the different values that come with it. And I'm going to try and make this video shorter. My other videos that I've been making were like an hour long, and I'm going to try and keep this one short. So let's just get right into it. Positioning with CSS, there are 5 different values that you can use, and the default value, if you don't set a position on your CSS, is static. So I'm just going to cover these really fast, and then I'll show you actually in a browser how they all work, and that will be that. So position static is default. If you don't set a position on your CSS elements, that is what it is by default. So though the definition is elements are positioned static by default and remain in the normal flow of the document, you cannot use top, right, bottom, or left properties. So basically, they're just normal. It's a normal element in the browser. The next one would be position relative. Elements are positioned relative to their normal location. Using top, right, bottom, left properties will move the element accordingly. So again, the elements are in the normal flow of the web page. They look normal, nothing has changed. But you're then able to use top, right, bottom, and left properties to position the element based off its default position. And all of these we're going to cover in depth, so don't worry about it if you're a little confused. Next one is position absolute. Elements are positioned relative to their nearest positioned relative. If there are no position elements, it is positioned relative to the body. And when I say nearest position relative, I mean any element that is not position static. Any element that is not the default position. So I'm going to say that one more time. Elements that are positioned absolute are positioned relative to their nearest positioned relative. If there are none, then it's positioned relative to the body. So keep that one in mind. Next one is position fixed. Elements position fixed are relative to the viewport, so the document, the browser, and stays in the same location even when the page is scrolled. And this element is taken out of the normal flow of the document, and other elements will move up to take its place. Position absolute has that same, the same thing occurs where it is taken out of the normal flow of the document, which again I'll elaborate on in a little bit. And then we have position sticky, which is it alternates between relative and fixed, meaning that it is at its normal location until you scroll to a certain point that you specify using top, right, bottom, or left. And once you hit that point, it then becomes fixed and does not move anymore. So let's get into a few examples of this. If I alt-tab over to this little document I have here, I'll go to the code. I have just in the body, I have a simple HTML skeleton here, and I have a parent div, which inside that is an h1 and then 2 child divs. I've just named them child 1, child 2. So you have the parent, and then inside is an h1 and then also 2 child divs. And if you look at the CSS, the parent is just 100% width, which it is, 1800 pixels height, so you can scroll a little bit. Child 1 has a background color of yellow, 300 pixel width, 300 pixel height. That's this guy. Child 2 is color white, background black, and then same width and height. So that's this guy. So by default, all of these are position static, like I was saying in the slides. And the first one we're going to talk about is position relative. So if I just go to child 1 and set position to be relative, and I refresh the page, you'll see that nothing happens, which is good. But I now have the option to use these properties: top, left, right, bottom. You can type them in any order, and you can use 1, you can use 2, I'm just typing all 4 because I'm going to show you examples in the dev tools here. But you have to have position relative for these to work, or any position other than static, the default. So now if I look in the browser and refresh, nothing happens. But over in the dev tools, if I click top and start incrementing the pixels, you'll see that this div is moving from the top down. So it stays in its normal position once it's position relative until you start adding some of these properties. So if I add some from the left, you'll see that it moves from the left. If I add some from the right, you'll see that it moves from the right. And if I add some from the bottom, you'll see that it moves up from the bottom. So that's what position relative does. It keeps the element in its normal flow and then allows you to alternate its position using top, left, right, and bottom. That's pretty simple. If we go back in here and set position to be absolute, and I get rid of these properties, and I save, and if I refresh the page, you'll see that it looks like the second div disappeared. And what happened was this child 1 div, seeing as we positioned to absolute, has been taken out of the normal flow of the document of the browser. So it's almost like this div, the child 2 div, doesn't even know that it exists. It's not actually taking up any space on the document. So this div moves up to take its place. So that's all that happened. But at the same time, I can still use, since I said it's something other than static, the position, I can use these properties again. So I'll start with bottom. If I do type bottom 0, and I refresh the page, you'll see that the child 1 div moved to the bottom of the page, the bottom of the browser. Right? So I'll do the same thing. If I go right 0, you'll see, and I refresh, you'll see that it moves to the right of the entire page, the right of the browser, like past the parent div and everything. And that's because it's moving to its nearest positioned element. So the parent has a position of static because we didn't change it. So that's the default. So that doesn't count. So it's going off of the body. So position absolute, we're positioning this div absolute to the body. So when I say right 0, it's going to go right 0 to the end of the browser, basically. Same thing that would happen if I type top 0 and I refresh the page. It'll go to the top of the browser. So again, if I do like 100 pixels and refresh, it'll go 100 pixels from the top of the browser. And it's not in the normal flow of the document, so that's why it's overlapping the way it is. But if I set the parent div to be position relative, and then I refresh the page, nothing happens still. But now if I do right 0, you'll see that it's to the right of the parent div. It's not to the right of the body anymore, because the nearest position element, parent, is actually position relative. So this position absolute is now being based off of the position of the parent, because we have it set position relative. And this could be anything, absolute, static, anything but static, basically, anything but the default. So that's how position absolute works. It's positioned absolute to its nearest positioned element. The next one we'll talk about is fixed, which I'm going to get rid of this relative again. Fixed is based off of the viewport. So no matter what, it's based off the viewport, and again, it's taken out of the normal flow of the document, and it's like I said, to the viewport. So if I refresh the page off of fixed, you'll see that it looks just like absolute in the sense that the second div moves up to take its spot because it is no longer in the normal flow of the document. But if I set bottom to 0, it moves to the bottom of the page just like absolute did, because no matter what, fixed is based off of the viewport. So if I say, you know, right 0 again and I refresh, it'll go to the right of the page again, the browser. And the difference with fixed though is if I set bottom 0, right to bottom. If I set the bottom to 0 and I refresh, it'll go to the bottom of the page. But you notice if I scroll that it stays at the bottom of the page. It stays at 0, as opposed to absolute, where it'll scroll. So fixed is out of the normal flow of the document. It is based off of the viewport, and it does not move when you scroll the page. So that is how fixed works. And then the last one we'll talk about is sticky, which I haven't used too often, but I might be using it more in the future. Is very similar to fixed, but it's a mix between fixed and relative. So if I set top to be 0 and I refresh the page, you'll see that it goes back to the normal positioning. It is in the flow of the document, because it's basically positioned relative right now until it hits, sorry about this, until it hits top 0. Once it hits this top 0, it will turn from relative to fixed. So what I mean by that is if I scroll, once it hits the top, it now becomes fixed and is out of the normal flow of the document. So that's how like sticky nav bars work. You can have a div, for example, if I set this child 2 div to be sticky, let's do that. I'll set position sticky, and then you have to set a property top right bottom left with sticky. You have to use one of those. So if I set that to 0 and I get rid of it on the child 1 and I refresh the page, nothing happens. It's in the normal flow because technically it's relative. But as I scroll, once it hits top 0, which is up the top of the browser, boom, now it's fixed and it'll stay there. If I were to have more scroll, it would stay there the whole time. It wouldn't go off the screen. It turns into a fixed once it hits top 0. So that's how sticky works. So yeah, honestly, that's the end of the video. It's a pretty brief rundown of how positioning works. And if I went too fast, which I know I did, you can replay the video, pause, and be sure to ask any questions you have in the comments. I'll read every single one of them, and I do take your feedback, and we'll use that in the videos I make in the future. So I appreciate your feedback. And yeah, if you learned anything, if you enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe. I really appreciate it. It keeps me motivated to make more videos like this. I do have a lot more videos planned, so thank you guys for watching, and until the next video, I will see you next time.